Okay, so welcome to a little tutorial about audiobook editing. I have been editing the audiobook for my novel Nightblade for quite some time, but I'm now going to be turning this over to somebody else, and so I'm making this tutorial to teach them how I do my audiobook editing so that they can do it the same way. And hopefully, if anybody else sees this, it will be helpful to you as well. Getting some of the basics of editing an audiobook. So first of all, let's take a look at our session. I'm working in Adobe Audition, and as you can see here, we got a long session. It's currently just over 11 hours long, and this is the entire recording. These big files that you can see taking up most of the space are the raw audio recording. I literally, just read it all the way through. They're split up into different audio files, and those are different recording sessions. So some of them will be, an hour and a half long, or whatever, just however long I recorded before my voice started giving out. And then as we get in over here, we can see where I've already been doing my editing. And we are through the first 10 chapters of the book and just beginning on chapter 11. And starting with the beginning of a chapter is a perfect place for us to begin, because there's a certain protocol that happens in each chapter, and that's what we are going to be starting with. Before we get into actual editing, I want to talk about the structure of the tracks themselves. So at the beginning, when I started working on this audiobook, I developed a nice mix for my voice. Over here on the left of the track, you can see where I've got all of these effects plugged in. Ones such as dynamics processing, single band compressor, multiband compressor, de-esser, graphic equalizer, studio reverb, hard limiter. It's beyond the scope of this tutorial to say what all those are and how I'm using them exactly. You can probably find other tutorials on how those work. In working on this book in particular, it's just important not to mess with any of those settings. Don't touch them. And all of our actual editing is going to happen in this track. So you leave those settings alone, and then when we're exporting the final done book at the end, they will all go into the final recording because they're on that audio track. Below that, we have this second track here called silence. And so what silence is, it is silence that we use during the editing of the audiobook. And it is filled up with clips of 30 seconds of silence at a time that I record at the beginning of each session. And the reason that we record a new silence at the beginning of each session is some subtle things might have changed while we were recording, in between different recording sessions. My body might be placed slightly differently. The mic might be placed slightly differently. There might be some other ambient noise going on that I can't hear or don't notice when I'm actually doing the recording. And so if we zoom back out and we take a look at these bigger audio files, you'll notice that at the beginning of a lot of them, there's these long gaps of silence. And if we play this, you'll hear me say, "So as we usually do, we're going to record 30 seconds of silence. Here we go." And then it's just 30 seconds of silence. So as you come to each new audio file, what you'll do is you'll take 30 seconds of this, and you listen to it to make sure that it's actually silent and that I don't make some ugly mouth noise click or something like that. You just listen to it, get yourself a good 30 seconds or so. And once we've got that, yeah, see, there was a little noise there. So we'll cut it down to 26 seconds, which is totally fine. We'll take that, and then we will, on Mac, it's Option. On Windows, it's probably Alt, although I don't know for sure. But we'll copy it down onto the silence track. So now we've got the silence for this recording. We'll zoom out a little bit. We'll put it at the beginning here, and then we'll just copy it over and over again and select the two of them, and bada boom. That's how we do this. And So then we've just always got silence below the recording that we can use in our editing. And you'll see exactly how we use silence in our editing as we carry on with the tutorial. So that's how our sessions are set up. Let's start getting into the actual editing. And like I said before, we'll talk about the beginnings and endings of chapters. So this is pretty easy, but it's also important to get it right. So when we have the end of a chapter, this is the last line of the chapter.
Come, and I will take you to her.
That's the end of the chapter. So right after the end of that line, we create a little, we delete this big gap of silence here after it. And so now there's nothing on the audio track. And then we take a little selection that includes some of the last bit of the audio file. And then we drag it out to a good 3 seconds. You want 3 seconds of silence after the end of each chapter. So we drag this out, and obviously I've already done this before we started, but you know, if you're doing this for the first time, you just make sure that you have a good 3 seconds here that does include overlap with the silence at the end of the last line. And then we go to our silence track. This is how we use it. And we option drag, or on Windows, probably alt drag it up. And it puts that 3 seconds of silence there. And you'll notice that because of the way that Audition works, it automatically crossfades with the end of the chapter. And so what we end up with is,
come, and I will take you to her.
And then a very nice 3 seconds of silence at the end. After the 3 seconds of silence, very important, we add a break. So the audio file actually breaks at that point. We add a marker, and you can see up here I've labeled the marker chapter 11 because we're about to start chapter 11. After the break and the marker, there's 1 more second of silence here. Okay, so this is 1 second of silence, and that is again just dragged up from the silence track up here. And then right there we have
chapter 11.
Although I messed that one up, and we'll get into the editing of that. So it's again the end of the chapter, 3 seconds of silence, 1 second of silence, and then the chapter begins. And make sure that you add a marker before the 1 second of silence. That's going to be very important at the end when we're exporting chapters for the audiobook. Okay, so now we get into the chapters themselves. Now, I'll usually record a few of these.
Chapter 11. Chapter 11.
Okay, so usually the last one is my favorite, because that's when I stopped doing different versions.
Chapter 11.
And that one sounds fine. There's no, like, ugly mouth noises in it or anything like that. So usually, when in doubt, the last one is the one that we want to use. So we put our selection right here at the very beginning, right before the waveform starts, okay? Then we use our time select tool, which you can access with T on probably both Mac and Windows, and we drag all the way back to the beginning of this audio file, and then we ripple delete, which is option delete. You can find ripple delete in Audition pretty easily. It's option delete on Mac and probably alt delete on Windows. So we do that, and we've got our correct chapter that we want. So again, 1 second of silence.
Chapter 11.
And then right after the chapter name or title or whatever, we cut it. Cut a little bit out here. And then we do sort of the same thing, but this time it's 2 seconds of silence. So right at the end, and then we select 2 seconds of silence. And you can always see the duration of your selection. At the bottom right corner of the screen, there's those blue numbers down there. And it says selection, start, end, and duration. So we know we have 2 seconds here. We get those 2 seconds, and then we drag some silence up, and boom.
Chapter 11.
2 seconds of silence, and we're ready to begin the actual story. On these selections, the 3 seconds of silence, then the 1 second of silence, then the 2 seconds of silence, it doesn't need to be exact to the thousandth of a second. Just make it as close as you can. It's not going to matter if it's 3 or 10 thousandths of a second off. Now, after we've got the chapter recordings, and this is a thing very specific to my project, it won't be applicable to all audiobook edits, but I also record another version of the chapter title.
Nightblade, Chapter 11. Nightblade, Chapter 11. Surround the... Nightblade, Chapter 11.
So again, when in doubt, just use the last one. We select that, and then we're going to copy it down onto a special track that I have here called Podcast Chapters. And that is for my own use. This audiobook is also going to be released as a podcast, so don't, that's just a thing for me. If you're just a general audiobook editor looking for, like using this tutorial to learn how to edit an audiobook in Audition, not going to be applicable to you. Don't worry about it. Then we ripple delete this silence here. And now we've got the beginning of this audio file where we want the actual story to begin. We find the first line of the chapter.
Surround the wagon! The constable's thin
Right there. Okay. Time select to the beginning. Again, we option delete. And wonderful. Our book, our chapter is now ready to go. We will take this silence and we'll drag the end of it just a little bit. And again, Audition will automatically crossfade for us. And so that just leads us from the 2 seconds of silence right into the beginning of the chapter. So now we've got our perfect setup for the end of one chapter, end of chapter 10, and the beginning of chapter 11.
Come, and I will take you to her.
3 seconds of silence. 1 second of silence.
Chapter 11.
2 seconds of silence.
Surround the wagon! The constable's thin, wheedling voice rang out in the shrill air. Leave no...
All right, and now we're ready to begin editing the book proper. So now we'll get into the common edits that we make when we're going through and actually editing the audiobook into a listenable file. There's a number of these, what I call common edits, so we'll just take them up one at a time. Common edit number 1 is super easy. The voice actor, in this case me, messes up a line, and then I just say it again. I pick it up from where I messed off. Pick it up from where I messed up and left off. So all you do is you find the beginning of the mess up.
Leave no... Surround the wagon! Oh my god!
I had some audio issues with my microphone while I was recording this, so it was a bit of a cluster.
Surround the wagon! The constable's thin, wheedling voice rang out in the...
So in this case, I actually started the chapter over again. So what we'll do in that case is we'll have... This is the beginning, right?
Surround...
Yeah. So we'll go here to the beginning of this waveform, okay? And in this case, we'll make a cut. Okay, so the command is called split in Adobe Audition's menu. So if you simply search the menu for split, it's Command K in Mac and probably Control K in Windows would be my guess, although I don't use Windows. So we've got the beginning of where our line is actually going to start. Then we go to where that line started in the edit that we were working on originally. We'll make sure that this crossfade isn't here because that can kind of mess things up. So we get rid of the crossfade. And then we select this audio file, or we just make a time selection, right? And we ripple delete. Ripple delete, again, we've already discussed. So in this case where we've actually separated out the clip, you have to select ripple delete clips, which is Shift Delete on Mac, probably also Shift Delete on Windows. And that will remove the clip and move the new clip to the beginning here. Again, we drag just a little bit of silence in the beginning so that we naturally fade from silence into the sound file. A quick note on crossfades in Adobe Audition. If we didn't drag the silence, Audition would naturally apply a crossfade. It always does. If you've got two audio files that butt up against each other, Audition automatically crossfades them on playback and when exporting the final mix at the end. I don't trust those crossfades because it will... You don't see exactly what the fade looks like, so there might be some extra noise at the beginning or at the end of a file. So I prefer to just be in total control of the crossfades at all times. So what I'm saying is every single transition in the audiobook should have a crossfade, except this one at the beginning of a chapter. The end of a chapter ends and the beginning of a chapter begins with no crossfade. But you'll notice that everything... Oh, I missed a crossfade here. See, don't want to do that. So crossfade goes there, crossfade goes here, crossfade goes here. Even though it's a very small crossfade, we just want to know exactly what we're crossfading at all times.
Surround the wagon! The constable's thin, wheedling voice rang out in the still air. Leave no gap for her to escape!
So that is the first common edit. A line gets messed up, I repeat it, and you just delete the mess up, leaving only the proper line read. There's another quick way to apply common edit number 1, and that's when the repeat happens very, very quickly, when you don't actually need to separate it out. So here, listen to this.
Escape! Lauren feared she might vomit. Lauren feared she might vomit.
So in that case, we actually just do it with a time selection. So beginning of this audio, or beginning of this waveform to the beginning of this waveform, and then we option delete, I believe it is on Mac, and probably alt delete on Windows. And again, we always do just a little crossfade, a little bit.
Leave no gap for her to escape. Lauren feared she might vomit if she had held any illusion of walking with Damaris out.
And there you go. So same basic idea, it's just we don't do the whole thing of separating out the audio file. Okay, so common edit number 2 is when there's some bad mouth noise in between sentences or at any gap in the recording. So listen to this.
But at the wagon's rear, she still had a chance.
There's that little, right in here, there's just a little, and it's kind of gross, just a little. It's often sometimes much worse than that, like if you listen to this. It's very kind of mouth smacky noises. So we don't like that. A little bit is fine. You can actually hear some examples earlier in the recording where there's like a little bit right here.
Around the wagon. She flung away the wood.
And it's so small and tiny that I just wouldn't even bother with it. But this kind of jumps out at you just a little bit. So what we do here is we select this area and we just straight up delete it from this audio file. Now you want to leave plenty of trailing space at the end of the last sentence, if at all possible. I mean, if there's bad mouth noises there, then sometimes you have to cut it. There's no real other choice. But even in a dead sound recording booth, there's always going to be some natural echo, which lasts, anywhere like a little bit of length of time after the actual sound of the word. And you want to leave that in wherever possible because it sounds unnatural and stilted if you take it out. So you try to target the mouth noises particularly. The same isn't true at the beginning of a word. It's much more forgiving because you're not dealing with an echo. The word tends to appear much faster. So once we've done that, we select not only the area that we deleted, but a little bit on either side, and we drag that up from the silence. So now, instead of mouth noises, we just have a nice little silence that fades in naturally.
She still had a chance. Just as she tensed to run, a cry of alarm sounded from outside the wagon.
And boom, the mouth noise is gone.
It was Damaris.
There's another little click here, which isn't too obtrusive, but we'll get it real quick.
It was.
Delete the mouth noise. Drag up some silence. Audition automatically crossfades it.
The wagon. It was Damaris.
So another time that this sort of editing applies is loud, obtrusive breaths, which I'll sometimes take in between sentences. Listen to this.
She stumbled past Gregor, who did not move a muscle. She lost her footing.
Like that breath just kind of delays and doesn't really contribute to the reading at all. And sometimes they're much worse than this. This is the first example that I could find for you. So we want to handle this actually very similar to how we would handle an obtrusive mouth noise, where we delete the breath itself, and then we do a little selection and pull some silence up in here. So now that breath isn't there anymore.
Who did not move a muscle. She lost her footing on the wagon's edge.
Now, there are quiet, unobtrusive breaths, particularly in the middle of sentences or when the pace is going very, very fast. You don't want to delete every single breath, just like you don't want to delete every single natural mouth noise that a voice actor makes during delivery. Sometimes it's just not obtrusive, and you have to use a bit of a judgment call on, is this breath contributing? Does it make it sound more natural? And if you're in doubt, take the breath out. And now if it sounds bad, just undo it and leave it in, because we don't want to give the impression that this is a robot, somebody just standing in a booth with no natural body functions going on at all. Breathing is natural. Mouth noises are natural. It's when they become so obtrusive that they distract the reader that we want to address and handle them. So now this silence that we've now created here has created another problem for us that we're going to address. And this is common edit number 3.
Move a muscle. She stumbled past Gregor, who did not move a muscle. She lost her footing on the wagon's edge and crashed.
See, now that is an unnaturally long pause between those two sentences. It's unnatural because I took a breath there. And if I if I hadn't taken a breath there, I would have started the words sooner. So what we do in these cases is when we have to delete a breath and doing so creates an unnaturally long pause, we generally want to have the next sentence start where the breath begins, because that's kind of where I would have started talking if I wasn't breathing instead. And this is the case for most actors. So we ripple delete or just move the audio file so that the speech begins where the breath started. And then we do the same thing of replacing it with silence. And now if we listen back to that.
She stumbled past Gregor, who did not move a muscle. She lost her footing on the wagon's edge and crashed to the ground on her shoulder. Pain lanced through her chest.
And that, within the context of the audiobook, sounds like a more natural pause. Again, this one's a bit of a judgment call, and you need to, gain some experience. If you're an audiobook listener already, it's going to help a lot. But I mean, you know how people talk, you know how people speak, and especially after you've grown used to an actor for a project that you're working on, you'll learn what their sort of natural pauses are, and you just work with that, and you try to make the gaps not too long, not too short, but natural to what they would naturally be with that actor. Another time where you'll often notice that you have to alter the timing of the original recording is when you've got one actor doing a book that requires multiple voices. Before they drop into a new character's voice or just a character who they haven't done in a while, there might be a longer pause while they, collect their memory of what that person sounded like. So listen to this.
From outside the wagon, it was Damaris. She has fled.
Okay, so there I was trying for a second to just get Damaris's voice in my head before I spoke, and so it's going to sound much more natural if it's right around...
Was Damaris.
Right around here. So we'll go in, delete that space, crossfade just a little bit, listen back to it.
A cry of alarm sounded from outside the wagon. It was Damaris. She has fled, cried Damaris. Where did she go? Gregor!
And then here, this switches to another actor, and you'll hear that I did it again.
Where did she go? Gregor! I know not, my lady.
Okay, so there's two things here. We've got some mouth noise, so we'll get rid of that first. And then we'll listen to this. And what I'll actually do here is I'll unmute the silence track, which will create less of an unnatural transition. Because if you listen to this now, it sounds like this.
Where did she go? Gregor!
And then all sound cuts out, and it's very hard to tell whether it sounds natural or not. So we'll unmute the silence track really quick, and we'll play it again.
Where did she go? Gregor!
Right around there. Almost cutting it in half. So we cut this, and in this case what we'll actually do, I think, is we'll just move the audio file a little bit earlier. And then we'll time select. We'll drag the silence up. Make sure to mute the silence track again, because it can interfere with other work that you're doing if you don't. So we listen to this again.
Where did she go? Gregor? I know not, my lady, said the...
And that sounds like a more natural pause in the response when she asks him the thing and then he responds. That sounds the way that would naturally sound if two people were actually speaking. So those are the various ways that common edit number 3 can manifest itself, where you are having to alter the timing of the original recording slightly. Again, use your judgment. It gets easier the more you do it, where you just sort of, you pick up after you do it a few times. Oh, okay, so it should be about this long, and you'll figure it out. All right, so common edit number 4. This is the last one on my list, and it's probably the trickiest one. It can be a little bit tricky. So sometimes my or any voice actor's mouth will create this huge, annoying, ugly smack or click, and it's right in the middle of a word. So when it's in between sentences, you can just delete it. When it's in the middle of a word, that's a lot harder. Fortunately for us, Adobe Audition has this fantastic tool that addresses this. It's really amazing. Audition's actually an amazing program. Hashtag not sponsored, but so listen to this.
Find her, or it will go ill with all of you.
With all of you. It's with, and there's this really ugly click that I didn't. Normally, when I hear that when I'm recording, I'll re-record the line and try to avoid it. I didn't hear it this time, so now we have to deal with this.
Ill with.
It's right in there. If you look at this, you can actually see where the waveform becomes jagged, and that's that clicking from the sound. So what we do is we put our cursor as close to the click as, decently close to the click, and then we actually double click on it. And that opens up the audio file in its own sub-editor. And we can get real fine detail in here. We can isolate that this is most of the click, and then there's a little bit more right here. But we want to address it a piece at a time. You don't want to do this with too much. So we select the click, and then Audition has a feature called Heal. Auto Heal Selection, okay? It is accessed in Mac by hitting Command U. Windows, it's probably Control U. But what we do is we hit Command U, and Audition automatically determines what is the jagged, unnatural clicking part and removes it. And we'll do it again here with this selection because I think that's a secondary click. And boom. Now we can see that all the jagged roughness has gone out of this section. And if we go back and if we play this again...
Find her, or it will go ill with all of you.
It's so much less. It's so much... It's still a little bit there, and there actually might be something here we can address even more. But already that's just made such a major difference. Okay, so that's just... It's still a tiny little bit there, but it's so much better. It's so much less obtrusive. So that's fixed now. But now we're still looking at the editor for just this audio file. So we go over to the top left to the Files pane up here, where you can see the various files that are associated with this project. And we just double-click on NBO1, Nightblade, whatever your project file is, your multitrack editor. And that puts us back to the multitrack, and we can hear it with the mix on.
Find her, or it will go ill with all of you.
And that issue in that word has now been addressed. And I'll find one more here so that you can see, again, how we do this sort of thing. Okay, so here's another example, and this is a common one. This happens a lot on G's, anytime I pronounce a hard G. So listen to this.
What game did Damaris think to play?
Just that really ugly click on game, and you can see it. You look at this waveform, and you can see this gigantic, hideous spike. So again, we double-click on the waveform, sends us into the individual waveform editor. And again, you want to isolate the part that specifically is more jagged than the rest. So right here, I think, should handle this for us. Hopefully that's not too extreme. So we back it up, we zoom out a little bit, we give it a listen.
What game did Damaris think to play?
Yeah, much better. Much, much better. Again, there's still a little bit of mouth noise, a little bit of click, and that's fine. You're dealing with a human being with a human voice, so there's going to be some sound.
What game did Damaris think to play?
But it's so much less in your face, jamming a needle into your ear. So we double-click on our multi-track session file, and that puts us back into the edit, and we carry on.
No one stood near her wagon. What game did Damaris think to play? Lauren could...
And we'll carry on with the rest of the editing from that point. So this is how we edit our audiobook, and this just carries on until we reach the end of the whole thing. I hope it's been helpful. I hope that there's been no confusions or questions. If you are the person, Alex, who I am specifically sending this tutorial to, obviously you can email me if you have any questions. But if you're just a viewer of my YouTube channel, just finding this tutorial, and you want to know more, or you maybe want me to address a more specific aspect of audiobook editing in the future, let me know. I've actually edited dozens and dozens of audiobooks in the past when I used to work at a sound studio, and now that I'm doing it for my own audiobooks, I'm learning a lot more about how to do it in Adobe Audition specifically. So feel free to drop a comment if there's something that you want me to address more specifically in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Just as a quick aside, if you're a book person and you enjoy epic fantasy, you can actually check out all of my actual novels that I write over at underrealm.net/books. There's a link to that in the description. Otherwise, I hope the tutorial was helpful to you, and catch you next time. Bye!